first, let me tell you a little bit about our guest. M.R. Sauter is an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, College of Informational Studies. They are the author of The Coming Swarm: DDoS Actions, Hacktivism, and Civil Disobedience on the Internet. They received their PhD in Communication Studies from McGill University in 2020, and they hold a master's degree in Comparative Media Studies from MIT. They've held many prestigious research fellowships, and their work has been published in many prestigious settings, including The Atlantic, the Journal of Communications, Case Western Reserve, Law Review, the National Post, the Globe and Mail, MIT Technology Review, collected volumes by MIT Press, many, many examples. And they've also frequently appeared as an expert on technology, culture, politics, and other topics of the day on both domestic and international media outlets. Their research has been featured by Popular Mechanics, Boing Boing, Slate, Der Spiegel, and the Christian Science Monitor. Their current research focuses on the history of finance in high technology, innovative economy, public-private partnerships, and the ways in which corporate policies impact the security and rights of individuals. You can find out more about them online at oddletters.com or on Twitter at oddletters. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sauter.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to do the share my screen dance, except I can't. Shannon, this has said that host has disabled participant screen sharing. So someone has to fix that.
We will fix that. Give us one moment. In this wonderful era of technology, we always have a moment.
It's okay. This is the dongle dance. In person, you had to do the dongle dance. Now it's the screen sharing dance. Haha, cool. Okay. So
All fixed.
I got it. So here's Keynote. Okay, I'm going to share that. And then I'm going to play that.
And this, perfection.
We can see the slides. Yes?
Yes.
Amazing.
Only the slides.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mal Sauter. As Shannon so eloquently explained, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Maryland College of Information Studies. A lot of my research is on innovation economy projects, sort of what the concept of the innovation economy is, how it's used in different countries, specifically countries that are maybe trying to move away from other more extracted economic models, specifically Canada, where I did my PhD. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is the sort of big major headline Canadian Smart City project. If you knew anything about smart cities, if you were following smart cities in the past couple of years, you were following the Sidewalk Toronto project, its announcement, its rise, its fall, and its current sort of post-mortem phase. So we'll just jump right in. So cities of dreams have a long history. Utopia as a literary form dating back from the reign of King Henry VIII, is more than the articulation of a dream of ideal urbanism. Rather, it is a particular and specific style of political writing. Thomas More's Utopia and other early examples of the genre, oops, that is not what I wanted to do. Where is my mouse? Sorry, we're gonna stop for a second because I lost my mouse, and if I can't find my mouse, I can't make my notes go, which is what I need. So hold on a second, everybody. Thank you for bearing with me. Let's try this one more time. There is my mouse. Amazing. Cool. So to resume, Thomas More's Utopia and other early examples of the genre were detailed colonial catalogs, a sort of political theory by way of natural history. Our narrator would be led around Utopia, always far away or impossibly isolated by geography or time, by a guide, immensely patient and knowledgeable, happy to answer all questions, no matter how prurient or minute. Utopian literature is a taxonometric exercise that, through its interpolation in narrative, transcends the form of the blueprint or social reform track, which were also popular ways of talking about sort of the origins of political science at the time. The narrative dreams of utopian literature, which are at once hallucinogenically and mundanely detailed in the all-hungry eyes manner of a frontier report to empire, are more than a blueprint for a new urban environment. They are an exercise in the intentional shaping of desire and of political possibility. The promotional materials produced by corporate smart city projects serve the same guiding function as a fictional utopian narrative and the idealized plans of religious separatists. Smart city proposals position themselves tantalizingly close to the everyday, practically at the end of the nearest subway line. While the literary utopias of Thomas More, William Morris, Edward Bellamy, these were inspirational dreams. The videos, prospectuses, and vision documents produced by Sidewalk Labs, Cisco, and IBM are conditional promises. They are half of a deal. They are a scrap of a warranty. Throw in with us, they say, and all of this can be yours. More's utopia begins with a pun. Utopia is a coinage, meaning either the good place, utopia, or no place or nowhere, utopia. It's a joke, right there at the front, about the irreconcilable and inseparable desirability and impossibility of the utopian project. But how the dream is spun, how the promise is made, tells us a lot about the politics being sold. This is useful in modern smart city projects that often claim to be apolitical, as is the current fashion among the high-tech companies that design, promote, and sometimes build them. The story of Sidewalk Toronto is about many things. On one side, it's a story about technology, automation, and innovation. On the other side, it's a story about municipal politics and power struggles. At core, though, it's a story about what a city is, who gets to define it, and who gets to determine its future. The story I'm going to tell you today is just part of that story. I'm going to tell you about the sales pitch Toronto Labs unleashed on the city of Toronto and the world at large as it attempted to sell its vision of the techno-utopia on the waterfront. Since we're going to talk about a dream, let's start with the proposed development site as it existed in January of 2018, sleeping, as it were, under a quite heavy bed of snow. The Sidewalk Toronto project began with a bang in 2017 and ended with a pandemic-muffled whimper in mid-2020, with Sidewalk Labs citing quote-unquote unprecedented economic uncertainty in the Toronto real estate market. However, when it was announced, the high-profile project was the first major undertaking of Sidewalk Labs, the New York City-based, smart city-focused sister company to Google under the Alphabet corporate umbrella. Sidewalk Labs was founded, according to former Alphabet chairman Eric Schmidt, to realize the dream of, quote, all the things we could do if someone would just give us a city and put us in charge. As Alphabet's Smart City division, the company worked to, quote, accelerate urban innovation through technology deployments undertaken in collaboration with city governments. Before establishing Sidewalk with Google CEO Larry Page, Dan Doktorov, the CEO of Sidewalk, had served as the deputy mayor for economic development under New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He had led 2 of New York City's unsuccessful Olympic bids, and then catalyzed those efforts into something called Plan NYC, a large environmental and economic redevelopment plan. In October 2017, Sidewalk Labs announced its most ambitious project yet, transforming the underdeveloped Toronto waterfront into an affordable, eco-friendly, smart neighborhood, a little model town to showcase Sidewalk's innovative technologies and urbanist ideals. For the privilege, Sidewalk committed $50 million to a year-long joint planning process with Waterfront Toronto, an urban development corporation. Waterfront Toronto owned the majority of the proposed development site, which was called Quayside. Waterfront Toronto, which in my research notes I styled as WTF because I'm funny that way, is an odd little organization with a fascinating history in Toronto real estate politics. Publicly funded by the Canadian federal government, Ontario's provincial government, and the City of Toronto, its governing board is appointed, not elected, and it's composed primarily of wealthy individuals, many of whom are involved in real estate development in the city and the province. Since 2001, its mission has been to revitalize the area around the Toronto Harbour through development, environmental remediation, public transit expansion, and site-specific public projects. Having expended approximately 1.5 billion Canadian dollars in seed funding since its founding, Waterfront needed a new partner with deep pockets to continue its development mission. And this made Sidewalk's $50 million commitment, which was about $63 million in Canadian money, all the more attractive. The Sidewalk deal came from a March 2017 request for proposals, where Waterfront sought a, quote, innovation and funding partner to help them take on the Quayside parcel. The Quayside parcel is a 12-acre plot of land bordered on one side by the derelict Victory Soya silos, which you can see in this image, and by highways and Lake Ontario on the other sides. The goal is to transform the area into a, quote, highly sustainable, mixed-use, mixed-income neighborhood that would create jobs and provide affordable housing in a city where one-bedroom, 500-square-foot condos in the downtown core routinely sell for over 500,000 Canadian dollars. When I talked to them in 2018, Waterfront wouldn't tell me much about their selection process, although they did confirm that some local and Canadian firms had in fact submitted proposals. However, Sidewalk Labs went further. They submitted a 200-page response that went far beyond the borders of the 12-acre parcel, ambitiously extending to include over 800 acres of what is known as Toronto's eastern waterfront and Portlands neighborhoods. Where Waterfront Toronto had envisioned a modest neighborhood redevelopment project, Sidewalk Labs proposed to take charge of an area as wide as the island of Manhattan and almost as big as Toronto's existing downtown core. Still, despite all of that, the most solid manifestations of the Sidewalk Toronto dreamscape were and have always been the illustrations that accompanied every new step forward or sideways or backwards. Lush, colorful, and calming, and detailed to a fantastic degree, these illustrations were a major component of the Sidewalk sales pitch. Visual representations of utopia, either in actual pictures or via the drunk with description, vaguely colonial travelogue narratives that have marked the genre since Thomas More, have been a central aspect of utopia's powers of persuasion, inspiration, and political influence. Italo Calvino called utopias speaking pictures. For Calvino, seeing an alternative world, flourishing and functioning in images or in text was essential if the public was to effectively imagine a better world than the one they saw every day. For even though many fictional utopias are denuded of politics, the act of crafting a utopian society is a profoundly and intentionally political act. A smart city utopia like Sidewalk Toronto's project may be set in what Genevieve Bell and Paul Durish called the proximate future, always just out of reach, but on our way, just a few steps further down the road. But to discover that future, as Fontaine Belford put it, to draw it out before an audience with affection, care, and conviction is never disinterested. The visual style of Sidewalk Toronto's gallery of images was remarkably consistent. The original vision document is submitted to Waterfront Toronto and then later released to the public, was ornamented with charming scribbly doodles of Toronto landmarks, cultural touchstones, and Torontonian in-jokes. The architectural renderings in the document and those released since similarly had a cohesive, hand-drawn, almost watercolor feel to them. The images are reminiscent of the complex cutaways in children's books like David Macaulay's The Way Things Work or Stephen Beastie's incredible cross-sections. The people, drawn in ghostly white outlines, are too small to hold any detail, and they are enfolded into their environment in an implied whir of activity, giving the place an odd but cheerfully haunted feeling. The buildings are mixed use, featuring residential apartments, sharing structures with rock climbing gyms, offices, shops, art installations, and what looks like a giant still or kiln in the image you see here. If you're looking for the still, it's on the right-hand side of your screen on the top floor. I don't know why you would put a still there, but it's there. Green space and trees abound, and small suspended transit pods zip between buildings. Here, a red construction crane is positioned at the center of the visual field, hoisting a modular apartment unit into place over the quiet bustle of the streets below in what is surely an OSHA violation. Drawn by an architect named Andrew Edwards, these artistic renderings of Sidewalk Labs' dreams for the Toronto waterfront were featured in almost every story written about the project. Edwards is formerly of Heatherwick Studios, Thomas Heatherwick's design and architecture firm, which has previously worked with Sidewalk Lab founder Dan Doktorov on his flagship Hudson Yards redevelopment project in New York City. Quote, "I just tell him a story and he goes," said Kareem Khalifa, Sidewalk Labs director of buildings innovation, when I asked him what was up with these pictures. Sidewalk released more of Edwards' plush imaginings at later public consultations, many of which I attended. The most impressive was an all-seasons panorama measuring 4.5 feet long and nearly 1.5 feet tall. At the July 2018 consultation, high-quality printouts of these were placed on every table in the room so they could be examined closely by members of the public. They are warm and inviting images, showing diverse crowds enjoying mixed-use, tall timber buildings with immaculate landscaping in all seasons and all kinds of weather, which, if you've ever been to Toronto in winter, is a really fun fairy tale. The walls of the buildings are drawn transparent or translucent, and the people outside are strolling hand in hand, visiting an open-air library, talking on the phone, or enjoying a garden party, blending seamlessly with those inside, exercising in one of the ubiquitous rock climbing gyms, enjoying a pop-up indoor market, or working in a machine shop that flows uninterrupted into an open-plan office space, again, for unknown reasons. The seasons equally flow into each other, indicating the all-weather suitability of the space. The autumnal section shows a hint of transition, with a row of A-frame braces being installed to support the building's winter raincoat, a building innovation that Sidewalk Labs had repeatedly highlighted in their materials and presentations, as a sort of weird nod to the fact that weather exists in Canada. But beyond that, the people and their busy town activities hardly change. The structures depicted in the panorama and the people in them have achieved gently bustling equilibrium, predictably and attractively the same in all conditions all year round. So the top image on this slide is the Four Seasons panorama, which was sort of laid out in these public consultations, like the size of a small child, laid out on these tables. And the two images below were included in the vision document and later sort of iterations of miscellaneous prospectuses that were published at various points during the public consultation process. A particularly stunning image released in July of 2018 took a sweeping view of what Sidewalk called Silo Park, a never formally proposed green space encompassing the Parliament Slip waterway. Silo Park in this imagining contained aquatic recreational facilities, an open-air market, multiple performance spaces including one floating stage, a transit extension, numerous mature trees, and origami-like structures providing shade and shelter, and the Victory Soya Mill silos. Again, that industrial relic that marks the east border of the Sidewalk Toronto site, transformed from a gray concrete eyesore into a vibrant, charismatic film projection screen. The viewer is positioned quite close to an elderly couple, looking over the scene below through binoculars as if from a designated scenic overlook. Edwards has, through his drawings, rendered us all welcome tourists in this brief glimpse of the future. The amassment of detail present in Sidewalk Toronto's public images and visions echoes Roland Barthes's observation that the defining role of detail in utopia. Perhaps the imagination of detail is what specifically defines utopia as opposed to political science, Barthes writes. This would be logical since detail is phantasmatic and thereby achieves the very pleasure of desire. Barthes' phantasms combine sense perceptions, memories, ideas, and situated perceptions and worldviews. A particular image can be a cultural phantasm, drenched with ideological meaning when viewed from a particular standpoint or by a particular group of people, or may be meaningless if viewed absent that context and preconditioning. For Barthes, what renders something utopian rather than narrativized or illustrated political science lies in the semiotic luxuriousness of the phantasmatic details themselves. The richness of detail present in the illustrations and prospectuses of Sidewalk Toronto and corporate smart cities in general is fantastic, fantastical, and phantasmatic. Pull on the thread of, say, autonomous subterranean garbage robots, and it unravels a worldview with certain notions about climate, weather, infrastructure construction, trash and waste, the visibility of things rendered undesirable, and the social value of manual and municipal labor. That the details cohere ideologically, that they resonate with each other across the plans and dreams of a given project, that you can crack open any aspect of the dreamland and reveal fractally an identifiable worldview in miniature is what makes utopia pleasurable. And conversely, that lack of perfect resonance, of fractal interior replicability, is what makes cities in the real world so delightfully and irritatingly messy. Despite the nods to Torontonian culture present on the end papers of the vision document, the phantasms of the illustrations produced by Edwards are not Torontonian or Canadian. It would be a deft act of artistic and ideological ventriloquism if they were. Like the majority of the Sidewalk Labs and Sidewalk Toronto staff, Edwards is based in New York and is not Canadian. Moreover, it is not Edwards' purpose to artistically interpret the modern Torontonian moment. His work is here to establish a visual rapport with the audience for the Sidewalk Toronto project, engage Torontonians and Canadians, of course, but also, and perhaps more directly, the global technocratic elite that consider city building to be the next step in their career trajectory. Sidewalk described their proposed neighborhood as over-provisioned with a broad range of sensors to enable parallel experimentation with multiple technology approaches, creating an environment Sidewalk characterized as ubiquitously sensing. Data from these sensors would be stored and processed to feed controls for everything from the ambient temperature of buildings to crosswalk signals to the assigned use of adaptable private and public spaces. Toronto's eastern waterfront is here envisioned as another kind of utopia, and every place, a showroom for Sidewalk's smart city technology. The vision was to optimize the eastern waterfront to Sidewalk standards, whatever those were, and prime the technology in play for redeployment in other locales. So let's state this in starker terms. The stated goal of the Sidewalk Toronto project was to develop, through the extractive data labor of residents, smart city technologies for export by Sidewalk and Alphabet. Edwards' images are intended to sell the project to people outside of Toronto as much as they are intended to soothe Torontonians, to convince them of the value, utility, and excitement of this particular geotechnological frontier. In this way, Edwards' work echoes the work of earlier colonial artists working in the 19th century, who sought to sell a politically coherent, attractive, and inviting image of life at the frontier, primarily to people who weren't there but who might want to be. Cornelius Krieghoff's paintings of the Quebec colonial frontier, for example, with repeating visual motifs and themes of happy imperial expansion and conquest, bear a striking resemblance to the renderings produced by Edwards, particularly in the harmonized politics at work in the image and the repetition of features and figures to induce a steady sense of place. The project of both Edwards and Krieghoff is to define and nostalgize proximate potential, proximate either geographically or temporally, using artful invocations of phantasmic images that are intended for and accessible to an audience outside the geographic boundaries of the project proposed. Krieghoff's many painted variants on a theme of habitants spilling joyously out of taverns in the Quebec snow in company of barking dogs and amusing carriage horses were not for those French-Canadian settlers depicted, but were intended for city dwellers in Canada, the United States, and Europe who took pride in imperial expansion and who might be convinced to immigrate and drive the imperial project forward with their bodies. It's not that the Canadian notes in Edwards' images are off, but rather Torontonians are not their only or even their primary audience. The phantasmic space is already occupied by a different set of values and political ideologies. The values present in the Sidewalk documents and illustrations are unsurprising to anyone who has followed the incursions of the tech economy into the civil sphere over the past decade. The Sidewalk project highlights in its tracks and images innovation, optimization, efficiency, and the central role of data. Municipal labor is automated away. The frictions, tensions, and irregularities of the urban environment are replaced with, theoretically, smoothly interlocking systems of innovative equilibrium. And the role of the citizen is whittled down into that of a producer of data for invisible systems to crunch. Sidewalk Labs repeatedly insisted that the materials it released were not plans per se, and I take them at their word on this. Despite their detail, pages of technical specifications, and self-contained, self-reinforcing phantasmatic nature, these are not planning documents. These are utopian dreams, given the feel of a city within a city, one which abides by a distinct collection of ideals of urbanity. To return to the Silo Park image, we can see that the rest of the city literally fades into the background. Edwards renders non-sidewalk buildings as transparent, unfeatured blocks. Waterfront redevelopment in Toronto is a fraught political affair with a long, long, long history. The area surrounding the Quayside site is still, even now, undergoing a development boom, also organized by Waterfront Toronto. Losing public access to lakefront views to high-rise condos is politically unpopular in Toronto, as it is basically every other place people try to build high-rise condos with waterfront views. But looking at the Silo Park picture, you would never even notice that these developments were there. They faded into ghostly insignificance, affording the sidewalk site impossibly uninterrupted views of the lake. Part of Sidewalk's project was, as any utopian project, what utopian scholar Ruth Levitas called the education of desire. Sidewalk's materials introduced attractively framed options and foreclosed potential alternatives. By presenting depictions of complete unto themselves urban systems and, as Khalifa told me, literal illustrations of a story of a near future of urbanity, Sidewalk argues its case at the level of projected, promised, densely described experience. Like other architectural models, these are sales documents. They invite the viewer to imagine themselves at home in a particular version of the future, in the narrative of the details. The political values at the core of Sidewalk's revision of urbanity are presented indirectly through Edwards's images, played out through pictures of a new way of life. Just as utopianists and religious separatists imagined that a more perfect society could result in more perfect people, Sidewalk's invitation is to imagine yourself as a product of their future. What kind of life could you have, and what kind of person could you be in Sidewalk City? These are materials of persuasion, not collaboration. Everything is imagined for the audience down to the layouts of the micro apartments. Again, it's not that these are plans. It is the completeness of the envisioning. There's no imaginative work left to be done by the audience. All that is left is to project yourself in among the plants and the tall timber buildings and the all-seasons promenades and say yes. The use of frictionless images and dreams to communicate potential futures is not always coercive. In the end, the colonial foreclosure represented by the works of Edwards and Krieghoff are down to the projects being sold and the story being told. One of the most frustrating things about the Sidewalk Toronto project was how boring it actually was, how teeth-grittingly mundane its dreams were. The story of Sidewalk's No Place on the Lake is over, but it was only ever just one part of one story. The Quayside site is still underdeveloped, though not abandoned. As you can see from this still from Amazon Prime's prestige, grim, dark, hyper-violent parable of American fascism, The Boys, the Quayside site and the Victory Soya silos have returned to Toronto's favorite hustle as a prop in other people's stories about other places. This is not so different than the role the city itself played in the story Sidewalk Labs was trying to tell, where the city, its people, its infrastructure, and its culture became resources for Alphabet's corporate aspirations. Sidewalk Toronto should be taken as a cautionary tale, not merely of the surveillant potential of urban technology, but instead as a harbinger of what corporations like Alphabet think they owe cities like Toronto. As we move forward, the stories we tell about the future of our urban places must be more audacious, more radical in their reconciliation with the natural world, more challenging to existing power structures than the options currently on the table. A company like Sidewalk, staffed by politicos from Bloomsburg, New York City mayoral office, private equity, private developers, and borrowed Google staff, is constitutionally unable to do this. They cannot be relied upon to tell the stories that we need. At core, utopian works were an excuse to explore and extrapolate out from individuals analyses of what it means to be human. Sidewalk left little room for individual and contextual humanity in its models and images. To reimagine the urban future, humanity's future, we must recenter contextuality, history beyond the colonial scale, meaningful collaboration, and individuality in order to surpass this most recent string of terrible bargains that we have regretfully struck. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm sitting here reeling because I hadn't seen a lot of those pictures before.
Are they fun? They're super fun.
They are, but they're also disturbing in the ways that you highlight. And first of all, let me just tell our audience that this is your moment to be thinking of questions and putting them into our Q&A, but I'm going to take the privilege of moderator here and ask the first question, if I may, because this has been bothering me.
Should I exit out of this screen?
Yes, sure.
Yes. Right. Cool.
Then we'll go, if you could just stop share.
Stop.
There we go.
I did it.
Fantastic. You certainly did. There was so much to unpack in all of that, and which is fabulous. I wrote down so many quotes from what you were saying to try to chew on them further later. But one thing that I particularly wanted to ask you about is this notion of utopian visions, like this one from Edwards, but utopian visions that in particular try to render anything, and I love this word choice, messy, try to render anything that's messy invisible. And I'm wondering if you could say a bit more, as an ethicist, I'm really troubled with the implications of that, what a particular vision might decide is disturbing or messy, and what that, might mean for the people who find themselves categorized that way.
Yeah.
So just if you want to float any thoughts on that.
So one thing that always got me about the sidewalk plans was I mentioned subterranean garbage robots. They had subterranean garbage robots. And I always thought that was funny because Toronto's on a lake. Toronto also has weird problems with water management in general. Like it floods a lot. These sort of municipal sewers flood a lot. It's one of the only places I've ever lived where if there was a lot of rain, the storm drains would actually just vent upwards kind of randomly. So water management in Toronto is an issue. And these people sort of showed up, and part of this vision they were presenting about this great neighborhood that they would produce, again, on the waterfront, involved tunnels with robots in them that would come and collect your garbage. And there are a couple of issues with that. One, if you have subterranean tunnels full of robots in Toronto, you're going to also have to expect that they're going to flood, which if you fill them with garbage, that's going to be a weird, messy problem. But also, it's about erasing the municipal labor of garbage collection. And Toronto has, in the past, had severe issues with sort of dealing with municipal labor, specifically municipal labor unions, specifically unions around garbage collection. And so for me, it was this moment of, aha, there's something. And then, of course, as Sidewalk is a New York based firm, they've also had massive issues, like famously massive issues with garbage collection and garbage collection unions in the past. And so it was sort of another example of, aha, I see we are attempting to do away with labor again. I see we don't like unions, and we have found a way to, instead of breaking the union, just replace them with robots. And even if that wasn't sort of a front of mind intention, that is the effect, to take an act of labor that is about maintaining the city and taking a job class that is a very important job class and saying, but we don't need this, which always made me nuts. Just makes me absolutely crazy whenever people try to do that.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I wondered about that, particularly the connection back to New York, and the sense that this might be part of a larger agenda to say, wouldn't it be nice if we did not have to deal with this very important reality, and if we could render invisible the people that we don't want to deal with, and we don't
Yeah.
want to give rights to, and we don't want to acknowledge. So yeah, thank you for that. I thought that was really something that jumped out at me. I'm going to read you some of the questions now. We're getting through the Q&A. The first one is, while Torontonians, is that the correct term?
Torontonians.
Torontonians, fantastic. While Torontonians rallied to turn Alphabet away, do you think the next target city will be as resistive?
So I was part, so I did all this field work when I lived in Toronto. I was working on my this is work that I did when I was ignoring my dissertation. I wrote my dissertation about something else. I sort of both recommend and don't recommend having a significant side project when you're writing your dissertation. So this was, I did a lot of field work on this. I did a lot of interviews. I was part of that group of like activist Torontonians who like spoke out publicly against the project. I did a lot of public writing about it. I would love for us to take credit for chasing Sidewalk out of town. That is one story. However, another story about why this never worked was, so I mentioned Waterfront issues the CFP in 2017 saying, hey, we need an innovation and funding partner for this 12-acre site. And again, it's just that parking lot. It's that parking lot and like another like little cut of land like across the highway. Sidewalk rolls up and is like, ah ha 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 ha, what if you give us this 800-acre parcel that you have called the Eastern Waterfront and the Portlands? If you do that, we can have autonomous cars, we can have a tall timber fabrication factory, we can have all of this stuff, but none of it will work at scale unless you give us those 800 acres. So another thing that's happening in these documents is this isn't about the 12 acres. This is a project that they were engaging in, attempting to convince the city of Toronto and like a group of people engaged, like from city council to the province to the feds, because they were all involved with this project, attempting to convince these groups of people to give them this 800-acre parcel of land. Were they ever going to get it? That's a really great question that nobody wants to talk about, because in October of 2017, Toronto City Council passed something called the Portland Development Framework. And the Portland's Development Framework was a proposed sort of plan for the development of that parcel, or certainly a large chunk of that parcel, that was not in small part dedicated to something called Hollywood North. Hollywood North is Toronto pretending to be New York City on film, or Washington, D.C. Designated Survivor is also filmed there, and Kiefer Sutherland made a very magisterial video promoting the Portland's planning framework because he was like, I want to keep filming Designated Survivor in this fake White House in Toronto.
Just a quick note, hilariously, we can all relate over here because Cleveland is New York in the Avengers series.
Yes, exactly. So the thing that was happening here was not, like, there was a lot of stuff happening about data and about privacy and all of this stuff. But what was happening at core was a fight about land. And what's funny to me is that there is a substantial, I think it's very reasonable to look at this and say, I don't think you were ever going to get that, because this was a fight between American film interests who wanted to use Toronto as a set, which Toronto is like a huge part of the Toronto economy is film and media. I have a friend who's literally in Toronto right now working on the new Why the Last Man series. And that was the fight. So I'm happy for us to take credit as like the block sidewalk and all the stuff where we made a lot of noise, and yeah, that was meaningful. But there was this other city politics thing happening, which people really didn't talk about a lot. And because it's less interesting from the perspective of this is about your rights, which is why I think it's really important to look at this not as about technology, but as about city politics and the relationships between cities and corporations.
That's a perfect lead in to the next question that we have, which is, oh, yay, it's from one of our military ethics MA students, Ryan. And Ryan asks the following. It seems as though Sidewalk Toronto lacked transparency and was mainly corporate driven, but massive technological innovation like smart cities pose both a great risk and threat to the people living there. Many have argued that tech like this has made the rich richer and the poor poorer. You mentioned that there needs to be more collaboration, but total direct democracy seems unattainable in the development of this tech. What are your views on how to make corporate technological innovation more democratic? Who should and shouldn't be in the conversation? Should there be government regulation around certain people serving on government boards of corporations, or restrictions on how corporations should be developing things like smart cities? What level of diversity and perspective is required and attainable to ethically develop this kind of wide-reaching tech?
Okay, so there are like 6 questions there. So the broad answer to your question is it is possible to integrate technology into city planning. We integrate technology into city planning all the time. A really bad way to do that is to take huge tracts of land, give them to companies, and say, here, you don't have to obey any laws for this project. Because that, like, I keep doing this thing where it's like, that was the other thing, because there were lots of things about this thing. They didn't want to abide by any zoning laws. They didn't want to abide by any building codes. They wouldn't tell anybody which of these things they wanted to not abide by. They just wanted to not. And they kept saying it was like, oh, but if we have to abide by zoning codes, then we can't do things like have light industry in a residential neighborhood. And wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't you like light industry, like a woodworking shop in a residential area? And like, on the one hand, you're like, sure, fine, but also you won't tell me what it is you're doing. You just keep saying you can't do it unless I agree to not enforce any of the zoning codes or rules that we have for you to do it, which isn't, I'm not a big fan of that. Like, that's not great. So there are sort of basically 2 ways to go about making a smart city. 2 primary ways. One, you can greenfield it. Bill Gates has been pursuing a greenfield smart city development out in the West, in the American West, for a while now. I'm not sure what the process is on that site.
And just to clarify, Miles, that means that you're not changing an existing city, you're creating one from scratch, right?
It means there's nothing. There's no sewers, there's no water, there's no fire, there's no emergency services. You are building the whole thing.
Gotcha. Just in case any of our audience didn't know that expression.
Or you can move into a thing that already exists. When you move into a thing that already exists, you don't have to make all your own transit and make all of your own sewers and make it everywhere for all of your employees to live. But you do have to deal with the people who are already there. And I have been told by people who were on the inside of this project that that was a point of contention about this project. That there were certain people who were higher up, let's say in the alphabet chain of command, who were like, why are we dealing with these messy, dirty people? Like these messy humans who we have to deal with their desires and traditions and culture and opinions. Why can't we be seasteading? We should be seasteading. And then you had other people who are like, but we want to work with an existing city. And so that was a tension that was present in this company as it attempted to deal with this government. Now, something I have also been told is that they had this was not Sidewalk's first choice. Sidewalk didn't show up in Toronto and be like, it wasn't love at first sight. They had been rejected by multiple cities before this. And one of the reasons why I sort of highlight waterfront at the beginning is because one of the only reasons that they were able to get this far in Toronto is because waterfront is a really weird organization. They have a lot of power, but they need a lot of money. They own a lot of land, and they have much more sort of freedom to bring in development partners than other types of sort of city or municipal development organizations typically do. Again, something that I was told was that this was a project that was sort of dropped on the province. The provincial government could have expected to have more input into it than it did, and they were not happy about the way in which it was sort of delivered unto them. There's been a lot of indication that this was something that was pushed from the federal level because the current Liberal government in Canada really likes Google. They're really pushing an innovation economy agenda because, again, like as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, they are a country, like Canada is a country that doesn't want to export. They don't want to be in the tar sands business anymore. They don't want to be in the natural gas business anymore. It's not good for them. It's not good for anybody. Every time they try to put in a new pipeline, they end up in a sovereignty fight with First Nations, and they don't want to keep getting into those fights because they're starting to lose them at the sort of Supreme Court level. So they don't want to be in that business anymore. And so there's a huge nationwide push to to an innovation economy. And so this was conceived of at the federal level as something that was a major part of that innovation economy push. And so the question is like, well, who needs to be involved? Lots of people were involved. It's just they were involved in what was essentially a neo-colonial project, like a corporate colonial project. Canada is a corporate colonial country. It was founded in the 1600s by the Hudson Bay Company as a project to go get beaver pelts and miscellaneous other natural resources out of this huge colonial holding. The Hudson Bay Company is still around. They're a department store.
I didn't know that. They really are?
Yeah, they're a department store. They are one of the largest leaseholders in Canada. They have a really fascinating relationship with WeWork, just to bring in another fun company. What should be like the thing that I think gets lost, and it sounds like I'm wandering away from answering your question, but I'm not. The thing that gets lost here is that this isn't actually about technology. This is about land. For the longest time, no one knew how Sidewalk was planning to make any money. We were like, are they selling the data? We can only assume that they're going to sell data, and that's a problem. Nobody likes it when people sell data. No one likes it when you're sort of mined for this resource and then other people profit from it. We don't like that. We're not a fan of it. That wasn't it. It was later leaked to, I think, the Toronto Star that the profit model for Sidewalk Toronto was diversion of property taxes and development fees that would usually go to the city. They wanted those to go to them. They had not publicly announced this because it was obviously deeply unpopular when it was leaked. People were just like, wait, what do you mean you actually wish to collect and hold taxes? And so one thing to keep in mind is that the promise of the technology is how they bring you in. But that's not where the money is, and that's not where the power is, because the power here is actually in control of the land. And that's something that's really, it's moderately easier to remember in Canada, where lots of things are about land. In the US, especially, we forget that almost all the time, that innovation economy stuff is almost always actually just about who owns the land that Facebook is built on, who owns the servers, who owns the actual physical space, because you can't make more of that. You can make more data whenever you want.
I mean, I have to say, I find that really helpful because I fell directly into the trap that you were just describing. I even wrote down the point about broad range of sensors and data in all caps going, aha, but it isn't about that. It's about the land. That's extremely helpful. And I didn't know that.
Yep.
My goodness. Okay. So I think you may have answered all of 6 of Ryan's questions, but he may have more. I don't know, and he's welcome to add to them. But we have another one waiting, which is from George, and George says, first of all, great talk, Dr. Sauter. So yay. Has this particular type of project succeeded anywhere else?
So there have been a number of smart city projects, what we call actually existing smart cities. The biggest ones of these, there was one in South Korea. I believe there's been one, I think in the Arab Emirates. They were also greenfield projects. They're made by Cisco and IBM. There are a lot of noise and there are a lot of light, but not a lot of heat. They sort of create. Hudson Yards is a great example. Hudson Yards is not a smart city project. It was Dan Doktorov's sort of development baby before he moved to Sidewalk. If you've ever been to Hudson Yards, I recommend going just to go to see it. It's like, it's New York with no New Yorkers. It's very shiny. It's got a huge piece of public art that is, I don't even know what it's actually called because I just call it the shawarma because it looks like a shawarma. And it's very expensive. It's very clean. There's nothing there. And it's not sort of hypersensory, but it is very similar to how a lot of sort of actually existing smart city projects end up being, which is very clean, very expensive with nobody in them. A lot of these projects end up suffering from the same problem that like Corbusier's planned communities did, which is that they look great on paper, they look very compelling on paper, but no one actually wants to live there. No one wants to live in a Corbusier building. No one wants to live in these types of planned neighborhoods. There's nowhere to get coffee. There's nowhere to hang out. And so something that Sidewalk sort of tried to do, and you can sort of see it if you go look at these illustrations, is they're clearly attempting, these were not dumb people. Like they brought in incredible talent to try to make this attractive. The problem is the people they didn't know anything about Toronto. That was like a major issue that always happened was they brought in sort of this everywhere sense of like what it was going to be like to be in this place. And like Toronto has winter for half the year or more. It may still snow in Toronto between now and May 24th.
Yeah, I wrote down weather exists in Canada.
Weather really exists in Canada. And there's been a couple of like really impressive architectural errors in Canada involving people not realizing how much weather exists in Canada. Architectural materials in Toronto specifically have to have temperature tolerances from positive 40 C to negative 40 C because that is the range of temperatures you can possibly get in a given year in Toronto. Yeah, it was this weird issue where they wanted to build something where it was attractive to what people who maybe were not from Toronto thought was attractive. And it took them a long time to come around to figuring out, how do we make this attractive to Canadians? How do we make this attractive to Torontonians? But by that time they had sort of lost the thread. Like they had just sort of lost momentum.
Lost the plot.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know enough about it myself, but I intend to read more about China's attempt to set up smart cities in places like Nairobi, Kenya, and so forth, and how that is all shaken out.
Yeah, Belt and Road. Yeah.
Yeah, I have only a peripheral clarity on that. But in the meantime, we have another question for you if you're ready. Got one more queued up here. This one, it's from another of our MA students. She says with undisguised pride from Gus. And Gus asks, You mentioned the use of tech to work around labor unions. As technology advances and expands, will this trend continue, do you think? Or can the inherent differences between human labor and advanced technology be ameliorated?
Aha. Well, first, I want to poke at your contention that there is a difference between human labor and tech. Um, most AI systems now are not autonomous AI systems. In fact, none of them are fully autonomous AI systems. They predominantly operate on something called human in the loop labor. Um, and I have a book on this around here somewhere, I believe in a different room, called Ghost Work by Mary Gray, which I highly recommend if you're interested in this.
Ghost Work was the title there. Ghost Work by Mary
Ghost Work
Gray.
by Mary Gray of
Thank you.
Microsoft Research. And if any of my 441 students showed up today, you had that to read this week. So you'll be familiar with what I'm talking about. And
Wait, I'm sorry. Your students do all the reading?
they tell me they do.
Mine tell me that too.
I'm like, I choose to believe them because I choose to be happy. And so when we talk about one, let's be clear, the garbage robots were a dream. They were a fun, charming, charismatic dream about wouldn't it be great to have robots that disappeared your garbage. On the one hand, dream. On the other hand, dream that inherently is against the interests of labor. Like, dream that has politics. On the third hand, we have many hands. This is like the idea that you can disappear labor is both counter to the interests of labor, counter to the reality of how technology primarily works, sort of in the now and is in the near future. It's not that advanced technology and labor are opposed. It is that advanced technology does not care about the labor that it uses because it views that labor as a stepping stone to disappearing that labor. The more autonomous AI gets, the dream of that AI is it continues to be sort of disappearing the human labor that makes it function. Now, as it continues to reach for that goal, you end up with a sort of Zeno's paradox, which you sort of continue to need humans in the loop for miscellaneous things. And that sort of goal continues to recede and the human in the loop continues to sort of push out. It's a very real sort of, Mary Gray calls it a last mile problem. And so you shouldn't think about humans and sort of automated labor as being opposed. You should think of automated labor as constantly needing human labor as part of it, but as sort of let's call it the hegemonic dream of technology is to disappear that human labor. And if they can't actually remove it from the system, they will just try to disappear it in different ways.
It's very helpful because, of course, we end up in conversations quite a lot these days also about just this enormous umbrella of the future of work, and that kind of conflation of ideas happens a lot. So that's very helpful. Well, I can't believe it because it's flown by, but if we're actually at the end of our hour now, so but thank you so much, Malls. This has been fantastic, and I really did take an incredible amount of notes myself. And very glad that we taped this so I can go back over it as well. But thank you for taking time out to be with us here today. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day and a lovely weekend.
Take care. See you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.